Hello. Hi, we're just going to get started in about a minute. I'm just getting all my setup here. A little nervous. I'm a first timer. Okay, great. I'm just seeing that Major Labia has joined, which is an exciting name. Okay, guys, well, it's bang on 1 o'clock, so I'm going to get started with my very first live broadcast on Facebook and Instagram. So please do be patient if I don't catch a question or, yeah, don't be too harsh on me. Just come back to me and I will do whatever I can. So I'm just going to start out very quickly and tell you a bit about my career, but also my relationship with the King's Head, first and foremost. I am a trustee of the King's Head. It's been a great privilege of mine for about the past 3 years. I've always been a huge fan of the theater and a huge fan of Islington. So when I was asked to join the board of trustees, I didn't hesitate. And one of the things that I brought to the board was this knowledge of PR and marketing. And that's what I want to talk to you all about today. And now I need to specify right off the bat that I've never been a pure play entertainment or a theater publicist or a PR in that capacity, but I think that knowing the tools of the trade can apply across the boards to absolutely anything. So please do ask any questions. I'll be happy to answer whatever, but I'm just going to kick off with a really brief dialogue about myself and what I'm doing here and what are my qualifications. Interestingly, I am now a PR consultant. I picked the wonderful time to go freelance, which was right before the pandemic. I left a long career in PR where I was running an agency, and I decided to have a career change and to write a book about the death of professionalism, and how we could have much healthier cultures at work. What's interesting is that the death of professionalism pretty much was one of the first victims of the COVID crisis. Now that we're all in our homes and working in different ways, I think we're all bringing more of ourselves to the professional setting, and it's just a very interesting thing. We're letting each other into our homes, as I'm letting you into now, where we've all thrown dress codes aside and we're all treating each other with a lot more compassion and empathy, and recognizing that people play multiple roles. So pretty much took my book off the table and now I'm back in PR, which is great because I've been in PR for 20 years. It's been a very fruitful career. I studied actually art history and history at university, and then realized that that was only really good for winning pub quizzes. Although I went to New York hell-bent on being a curator of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Very quickly changed course when I determined what those salaries were. I'm not a trust fund baby, so in order to make a buck, I started out in PR, and it's a really good career. Your progression can be quite fast, and you learn and are exposed to a lot of things. I think quite like actors, actually. You can try on a lot of different hats. You work for different clients and different causes, and you get to sample a lot of different things in life, and it teaches you to think very broadly. So I will. I'll start out with some tips for PRs and promoting yourself and promoting your productions. And please do, if you have any questions, just ping them right along. I'm trying to keep my eyes on the feeds here. The first thing that I did really want to talk about was the best way to get into, or to get in a PR mindset, is to actually be a very firm consumer of media and of social media, because this is how you're seeing where influence starts and how things are promoted. So the keener eye you have to the publications you read, the things that you watch on television, the influencers that you follow, the content that you see on social that is really flying and trending and making people laugh and smile, the better you'll be able to leverage that tone of voice, those sorts of messages, all of those things in order to promote yourself. So really think of yourself as a consumer. Think of your own demographic in terms of what appeals to you, and that will very likely appeal to a lot of the people that that you follow, that you want to come to your productions, that you want to hear your own messages and how you speak. So that is really the first thing that I recommend that people do. And I think often it sounds very simple, but people lose sight of that. They think, I would love to be in the Evening Standard, but they've never actually read or don't consistently read the column that they want to be. So that's just something to think about, and to think very broadly, because that's the second tip that I did want to impart, is that I think it's very easy to stay in your lane when it comes to promoting yourself or your publication. So you might just think, who are the people who cover theater? Who are the critics? Who are the influencers that I want to talk to? But the story could be so much broader. So one thing that, you know, I when I look back at certain productions from the King's Head, there are so many that deal with HIV and AIDS, and I believe it was either I think it was Fucking Men, where there was data out about how that increased actually people's propensity. There were some surveys taken on site that increased people's propensity to want to get tested. That's an amazing statistic, and that could show up in a different type of a column. That could actually show up in the LGBTQ press. That could show up in a little bit of healthcare or public health angle. So there's different ways to slice things where you might get different attractors to your productions in your theater. There was another fantastic season of female writing, and I thought, oh my God, we should invite a podcast like The Guilty Feminist to broadcast live in this theater and talk to some of the people who are on stage about their writing and their inspiration and the need to hear female voices. So I guess what I would be saying here is to think as broadly as possible to broaden your angles and your possibilities for coverage. I've been talking at a good clip about one of my first tips. I'm just going to pause here and see if anybody has any questions. I see a lot of joiners, which is exciting. And if I've missed a question, I do apologize. Okay, so I might just keep blathering on. So my second tip to you is to think very commercially. And this just is my plea that PR can sometimes feel like a vanity metric for something. You see your name in lights, you see your name in a particular publication that you'd want it in, or your production in a particular publication. But you've got to think about the commercial success or the business objective for doing that. So do you want to sell tickets? Is that the ultimate aim? Then you want to be appealing to people who have the money to buy tickets, who have a propensity to see theater. You need to cut these things up demographically and figure who you want to be seeing your messages or your content and what that is ultimately going to drive. So as I said, it could fill seats, or it could fill your desire to be seen by other producers, directors, writers, things like that. So think very finely about what you want out of your publicity aims, and then match your channels and your strategy to that. That's something that I think is actually, you can make whole careers out of it. I always followed a strategic arm in public relations, but I think it can also come quite intuitively to you. One thing that we've been doing with the King's Head in particular, as I think many of you are aware, is trying to raise money. So that can be a commercial objective of certain coverage. So then you need to make sure that people know, for example, the King's Head backstory. Why do we need the money? What are we going to use it for? Why is it such an exciting time to get involved in this theater's journey? So there are just many different stories to tell, and you have to be conscious of how you want to do that. I think a funny thing to say, and maybe particularly to this audience, is that people need to be very, another tip that I would say is you really need to sell yourself. And sometimes that can feel so awkward, even if you're extroverted, even if you're a performer, even if you are so expressive in your everyday life, to actually say, hey, I'm great, come see me. I'm asking you for something. That's a different thing. And you have to learn to, I once used to work at a beach club in Rhode Island, and a man with a very East Coast accent, he could have been in a mafia film, said to me, sell yourself or be by yourself, sweetheart. But I think that is actually not bad. Okay, I've got a question. So this is from Ben, and he says he is holding a rehearsed reading of his play via Zoom and would like to gain some interest in the script in order to produce it. Who can I write to or invite? So the first thing that I would encourage you to do, Ben, is consider who is it that you really want to get eyes on that, and who also could you invite who has another audience that is bigger. So you've got to not only think of the targets that you want at the table, but then their own sphere of influence and who they may tell. There could be some interesting things to do with how you select the people who are going to read and what the target of influence is there. Who do they know? Who can they invite? How are you going to leverage all the networks that are sat at the table? I think it's a really interesting idea. I love readings. I just love watching them come to life. My friend in LA is a screenwriter, and I try to crash those whenever I can. So I wish you good luck with that, and ask me any follow-up questions for sure. Are there any other questions? I feel like I might be missing the Instagram questions because Facebook, I can read them better, and as you can see, I'm blind. Okay. I suppose another thing that everybody is very familiar with on this channel, because we're on social channels, is how to leverage social media. And there are so many ways in which to do that, especially because if you have the facility where you can quickly edit things and be quite creative with your content and put it forward to all of your audiences, that's something that's really, really important to do, to capture, to video, to edit, to label, to hashtag, to make sure that everything comes back ultimately to how to find you. That's another piece of advice that I'd give you, Ben, is that just everybody knows exactly who's responsible for what, how to find you, what you want of them, what the call to action is, but then just add your own production values and your creativity to make this content sing so that people can really participate and engage with it. Okay, we've got another question from Alex. Have I got examples of best practice that I've seen where a show that put together a very creative PR campaign? It's a really good question. I think, do you know what is so interesting is that there is such it's in theater, it's a little bit harder to unpick. If you were to look at commercial and brand PR strategy, there can be things that are very strategic in their execution, and they get you to think about things. I think in theater, what is harder to unpick is it the production? So for example, Cyrano with James McAvoy. Is it the fact that there's no prosthetics in that production, that it's a completely different way of looking at that story, gets its own word of mouth even before you get there? Obviously, the talent is going to be a big deal. So it's such an interesting question, because I think what goes into making a production great, it's a really complex thing, and it's hard to isolate any one promotional thing. I think that I'm going to nod to the King's Head here. I think that some interesting things that have been done with partnering with other venues, for example, Petersham Nurseries, and hosting live opera in that setting, and making sure that people can see on the streets, what is going to happen and how that's going to come together, what they can expect of the King's Head Theater, what new writing looks like, the fact that there are interesting partnerships in the community. I think all of those things get into PR in a totally different way than just the general, I'm reading this in the headlines, or I'm engaging with this on social. It is, who do you partner with? How do you see it in the community? What are people talking about? Just how is their word of mouth? Because that's probably really the most effective form of PR. And I think now, in post-COVID times and pre-COVID times, the way things were changing were all about word of mouth. You saw small brands come to life because people just recommended them, because influencers pushed them, because they seem so relevant to people. And you just saw big brands become a little bit less personal. So I think working with the community is something that I would advise in that situation as well. I just saw another question. Excuse me, to see the finger coming at the camera. That wasn't another question. That was Alex's question. I just was catching up. So at the midway point, I'm going to ask, oh, here's another question. How can shows engage influencers other than battering show tickets? So the first thing about influencers is you really do want to invite them to come along, to make them reach out to them and figure out what are the engagement points. And sorry, I just see somebody that I used to work with in Atlanta. Hello, Anna. Yeah, so you want to get them to come and see your production, and you'd like to do that in such a way that they go and recommend that to their audiences as well. So you not only want to extend the invitation, but think about other ways, especially the bigger the influencer is, that you can help engage with them on site to amplify their presence. So let's just say it's an opening and you've got a step and repeat board. You definitely want to do the logo board action. That I have to say that I'm in PR. I love a logo board. We've all practiced our S-curve pose, all of that stuff. But you may want to engage them in some kind of talk or Q&A, or there's just another way to kind of bring them into the production and make them feel like they're a part of that story. That could be a really interesting thing. To bartering. Sorry. Yes, in that question I said battering tickets. It's just clarified that it was bartering. I think, you know, in certain transparent relationships, even, you know, gifting the ticket. But as I said, I think engaging them the more that you can and asking them to get involved. Is there a dialogue that you want them to participate in? Is there just a simple publicity shot of that particular influencer there? But just be clear about what you're hoping for. And be assertive. This gets back to my tip before where I said you really do have to sell yourself. Be assertive about what you're asking for. So I'm not just kind of inviting you here out of the kindness of my heart, although that is, of course, obviously the most prevalent reason, but a little bit more about, like, I've asked you to come because I think it will be interesting to the people who follow you, and I would love a shout out, or I would love X, Y, Z. So just be assertive in what you ask for. Okay, just checking questions. So someone has said that they appreciated the example of meeting people where they are. So using the Peterson Nurseries example as one. And I really do want to absolutely, I think, pound home the interest, or pound home the point of finding those relevant partnerships in your life, those relevant venues where you can cross-sell, where everything makes sense. You know, theater and eating out go hand in hand, as we know. You know, pantos and Christmas shopping, or things like that. There will be intuitive connections. If you think of yourself as a consumer and put yourself in the shoes of the person that you're trying to appeal to, you will find intuitive connections that will lead you to some very interesting partnership points. And I think that even gets back to what we were saying before about thinking broadly in terms of your targets and your venues. You know, for example, when I did talk about the women's writing and women's productions that were at the King's Head, to really exploit those and show why those are different, and look at the different commentators who are out there talking about the need for women's voices. You can cast these things in so many different ways. That's what I find fascinating about PR, is it trains you to think quite versatilely in how you see stories and how they play out in the various, we would say in the industry, verticals, so the different types of press, and how you can weave things together and attract new audiences. Okay. We are officially now halfway, a little bit over. Are there any more questions before I start talking about? I'm looking at another failed loaf of sourdough bread. I'm not sure if anybody saw me tease this on my Instagram, but I like every other person in lockdown, has been experimenting with sourdough, and it's been an abysmal failure. And I could just see this thing staring at me from the counter, just mocking me right now. Okay, so a couple things about PR, because I presume that a lot of you will be doing this almost as a side hustle. So just like Ben, who's holding his Zoom, his reading via Zoom, the PR is something to do on top of. It's not going to necessarily be your day job. So I'll just give you a few tips about how you can start something like that at home. And I will start with just kind of the basics of forming your list, so figuring out who your targets are. And to wind it back to how I started, it's not only just saying, okay, here are the let's say 5 newspapers, and maybe I'll take a punt on a broadcasting. And I do actually want to stop there and talk a little bit about Tom Moore, only because, I mean, everybody's talking about Captain Tom Moore. He's absolutely amazing and adorable. But do you think that when he started this thing in his backyard and he thought, I'm going to walk some laps with my walker before my 100th birthday, that was going to be a nationwide news sensation? Even the amount of money that he was thought to raise was not, you know, he certainly didn't endeavor to raise almost 30 million. He started with a very low number. And those things just get out. You take a punt. Oh, why don't I let the local media know? Maybe they're going to let somebody in broadcast know. But if you think that you've got a unique angle or something to say, go ahead and give it a try. I would say be fearless. It's so interesting. I was listening to a podcast the other day about food and drink PR in the time of COVID, because as many of us are aware, drinking is up, eating is certainly up. It's one of the few things that we all can sort of do in our homes and one of the moments of pleasure we can afford ourselves. But they said people are trying to be so respectful of the pandemic that the actual number of pitches has decreased massively. And also the quality and the imagination behind them has decreased. So I think what is interesting